Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We still have some people coming in. We're very excited about today's webinar. We're going to be speaking about the present and future of electric vehicle charging and everything that comes in it from a legal standpoint, an operational, a managerial. Just a couple of housekeeping things at the beginning. A recording will be posted online sometime next week. So if you miss it or anyone else you know would like to listen to it, they may. We also have the question box at the bottom. So if you have any questions along the way, submit them and they will be presented. If there's not enough time to answer everyone's questions, we will most certainly get to them after the webinar. And lastly, please be advised while we have Donna Berger, shareholder and managing partner from Becker on, that this is an educational event and should not be construed as legal advice. But we can talk about that a little bit further down the line. With that, please allow me to introduce Donna Berger. Donna, if you want to just share a few words.
Well, first of all, thank you, Regan, for having me on this webinar. I think this is an incredibly timely topic. During the pandemic, 20 to 21, not many people were buying vehicles, but that's picked up. If anybody's actually tried to purchase a vehicle lately, you'll know how long it takes. And there's incredible renewed interest in, I should say, growing interest in purchasing electric vehicles. And as you know, we've got a lot of older communities throughout Florida where people are moving in and they're looking to install charging stations. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the legal issues associated with those charging requests.
Thank you, Donna. And I'm going to quickly introduce Danny, and then we're going to jump right into the legal side to start. We have Danny Kaduk, who is a senior account manager with High Power Incorporated. Danny, if you want to say a quick few words.
Hey, Regan. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. So Donna's going to talk about all the legal stuff. I'm going to talk about all the technical stuff and all the things that we go through every single time we design one of these systems for each and every building, because we already know all the questions. We already know what we're going to go through. So we're going to go through this with you guys, as we get through the webinar.
Excellent. And thank you. And I, again, my name is Regan Maroc. I serve as Senior Vice President for ACAM in the Southeast. And I will be your moderator today. So with that, Donna, let's jump right into the legal requirements for installation and everything that goes along with that.
Okay, well, let's talk about the statute, because until the statute was amended, there was no right for individual residents to request a charging station. The law was changed in 2018. This law became effective July 1st, 2018. As you can see on the screen, it's 718.113 subsection 8, which is the actual statute that gives owners the right to install an electric car charging station in their limited common element parking space or a parking space that has been designated for their exclusive use. So that would be if they've been assigned a parking space, or if they have a parking space that's an appurtenance to their unit, they have the right to do this. Now, it's not an unfettered right. The association can certainly erect certain guardrails around the process, and I know we're going to go back and forth and talk about that, but frankly, you don't have to, as an association, just rubber stamp these requests. There's a lot of things that go into it, including whether or not your building has sufficient electrical infrastructure currently to support the request that's being made. There's insurance concerns, there's liability concerns, there's installation concerns, there's concerns whether or not the station might damage the common elements. So there's a lot that goes into it, Regan, but overall, the legislature decided that this is the wave of the future and that people are going to be, requesting more and more of these stations. So there should be a law on the books, and now there is one.
Thank you, Donna. And with that, before we get into infrastructure considerations, Danny, if you don't mind, everyone knows what EV charging is, but I don't think everyone really understands the evolution of it over the last 20 years. So perhaps you could share a little bit about the history, the advancements in technology, and where you see it going over the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. Thanks, Regan. So, 5 to 10 years ago, there were only some electric cars. Tesla was pretty much the only one that came out that was actually popular. And, to charge a car, it took quite a bit of power. It took almost, 300% more power than it does today. So as we're moving forward, and a lot of people want to do 10, 20, 30 stations in their buildings, if we see how things have been improving, technology wise, then, every 2 to 3 years, technology completely changes and they come out with new products and new ways of doing things, right? I'm even going to talk about that a little bit later on. There's new ways of EV charging that people don't even know about that, the main thing is to do what you need to do right now to satisfy what you have right now. And if you're going to do an infrastructure, do infrastructure that's going to help you, just not for EV charging, just for all future endeavors and future projects, if you're going to move in that direction. But, the way things have been going, like LEDs and VFDs and motors, everything is only getting better and getting more efficient on power.
Right. Well, you mentioned infrastructure, so why don't we jump right into that as far as the next slide. And Donna started to speak about all the different things that go into it, insurance and whatnot. Danny, speak a little bit about when you go and you meet with the board of directors, the conversation that you have and how you try to lay everything out for them as far as process goes.
So as far as process goes, the first thing I want to know is how many people do you have that want to plug in right now? Usually the answer is 2, 4, 6 cars, but we want to be able to do 10 or 20 cars. The most important thing that we're going to look at is the load calculation for the property, which is exactly what's on the slide. Every building has drawings that were made at some point in time. On those drawings, there's a panel schedule that shows the main panel, the house panel, and at the bottom of that schedule, it shows how much power that panel is consuming. For example, you may have a 2,500 amp or a 3,000 amp panel, but looking at the load counts, you might only be using 50% of that power, which leaves you 50% or a little bit less than 50% to use moving forward. If you don't have updated drawings, then we can put a load demand analyzer on the system that'll take real-time readings for 30 days and tell us exactly how much power that main distribution panel or that electrical panel is using. Once we have those numbers, we can tell you what you can do today and what you can do in future based on budgeting and needs of the building on how you want to move forward.
Okay, and Donna, from
Yeah,
your side, I was going right your way because we obviously want to hear it from the legal side. I'm sure your clients are reaching out to you a lot these days on the topic. Please go ahead.
So to Danny's point, what Danny just said is he walks boards through the installation of a common facility, not, he's talking about when a board decides, hey, we want to put a common area station in with multiple charging stations. It could be, 6, 10, multiple stations. Couple things to note with that. Number one, the statute says that the board doing that does not constitute a material alteration. So it's not going to require advanced membership approval. The statute specifically says that. It's interesting to note that the bill sponsor was in a way kind of tracking what's being done with satellite dishes, what has been done with satellite dishes for years in terms of if an owner wants to install a satellite dish, he or she can. The difference being under the law, if the association installs a community satellite dish, they can prohibit individual satellite dishes by the owners. That's not the case here yet with this law. That was suggested to the bill sponsor at the time that, hey, you sort of mirrored what we're doing with satellite dishes, but you haven't gone all the way. So something to think about for the future is, do you want to say that if an association installs a community dish, they can prohibit all these, a community's charging station, they can prohibit all these individual charging stations?
Right. No, that is a great point, and obviously diving into a little bit further, the one thing is the technology, the other is how you can actually get it done between unit owner and the building, the entity itself. That's a great point. What about potential liability, Donna? I'm sure obviously that question comes up because it's one thing to put a couple stations in, but some properties, and Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, are implementing all the infrastructure right now. So from a liability standpoint, what are you recommending to your clients to do if they are going to move forward with a project like this?
Boards, Regan, it's a great question. Boards have two major concerns with regard to these charging stations. The first is who's going to pay for what, right? And I know we're going to get into that. Who's going to pay for the conduit? Who's going to pay for the installation? And who's going to pay for the electric each month? But to speak to your point, the other major question is potential liability. What if something goes wrong? We've seen that some of these electric vehicles, have been imploded. There's been a fire connected with it. Remember, I said at the outset, the statute does allow the association to enforce certain requirements. It's not just an unfettered right to install an electric vehicle station. There are certain requirements you can put in place. I like to use a restrictive covenant that runs with the land that's recorded in the public records. And that covenant is an agreement between the unit owner who's installing this and the association. And one of the requirements in that restrictive covenant, Regan, is a requirement that the owner carry liability insurance and the association be added as an additional insured. And I'm sure Danny's going to tell you there's also a difference in terms of potential damage regarding where the station is installed. In some of our communities, it's right outside the person's unit. They literally could just run a cord. In others, it's very far away and it's in an underground structure. So I'm actually interested to hear what Danny has to say about how the location can be problematic.
Danny, please go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. So going with that, the units that you're going to purchase, whether the building is going to purchase them or the unit owner is going to purchase them, they have to be UL listed. UL listed means it's already gone through the approval of the United States or Canada or all the underwriters basically approved it, that it's not going to blow up or have any issues anywhere you're going to put it. The only issues in Florida is that you're not below a flood zone. So if you're in a flood zone, you have to have it, you got to go one level up. Other than that, you can put these chargers just about everywhere. And there's no issues of shock or blowing up. And yeah, I've seen what Donna's talking about, those articles where the cars blew up. That is just, that's an issue that Tesla or Bolt or whatever that they have. It's not something that the city takes into account when we're permitting these types of applications. They only care to see the submittal on the charger to see that it is UL approved for where we are going to put it, and the panel load schedule to make sure we're not overloading anything. Now, when unit owners want to put it in their own panels, 9 times out of 10, that's not a possibility, especially in a multi-story building, because you can't drill that many holes to get out of their panel. So for the most part, when we do build the infrastructure, we build the infrastructure for the condo HOA so that each unit owner can tap off of that infrastructure, no one paying more than any other one, but also adhering to the association's rules of how the infrastructure can be used to bring a charger to their own parking spot.
But Danny, I have a question. So there's several buildings I know of, particularly in Miami-Dade, where the parking structures are underground, actually.
Yeah.
If the unit owners, limited common element parking space is in that underground structure, are you saying that you cannot have a UL rated device in that designated parking space?
So you can. What I'm saying is I've seen the city both approve and deny based on the flood zone of the parking structure. I did one in Miami that was 3 feet below floodplain, and they wouldn't let us put a charger in that level of parking spots because 50-50, if there was a surge, it would be underwater.
Got it.
So as everyone on this webinar can see, we're going into some pretty intricate details, but we're also looking big picture. And I have a question for both of you. Donna, I'll start with you. An initiative of this size, I don't want to say EV is novel, but because it's advancing all the time and because of the requirements, the oil situation, it's something that we're constantly learning. What do you think is the best practice for a building to work with the unit owners to get everyone on the same page so that a unified decision can be made?
Well, listen, there is a law on the books that says that the association cannot out of hand dismiss a request. So I'm always a big fan, Regan, of our boards being proactive, okay? even if you're listening today and you haven't had one of these requests yet in your community, chances are you will in the future. So get out ahead of it. By the way, I can't think of many new buildings that are being built without these charging stations. So for some communities, this is about trying to be keep up with the market in terms of resale value, right? When people are looking where they want to live, you know, the people who are spending money may have an electric vehicle, and whether or not there's an electric car charging station may make it maybe one of the factors they consider. So a couple different things. I would contact your engineer for sure and find out what your current electrical system can handle. I would get with council to find out what what you can do when these requests come in. But getting out ahead of it may mean surveying your members and seeing if they would use an electric car charging station. Remember, you don't need their approval. It's not a material alteration, but it's always a good idea for boards to gauge public sentiment and see what their, how their members feel about a particular topic.
Yeah, Donna, before I pass it to Danny, I happen to agree with you. I think a lot of times residents, if they don't understand something, the first reaction is to disapprove of it. But if you give them the opportunity to really understand it and they can make a decision for themselves, it makes things move a lot smoother. Danny, I know you've done hundreds of these already, and every time I speak to you, you've done more of these installs. Are you seeing it play out that way? Are you seeing the boards kind of working with the residents and getting feedback, or are they at this point, like more so you seeing it just go through with the board? What are you seeing out there?
For the most part, the boards have been pretty good, getting in touch with the residents. I found that, in the beginning, as there were a lot more debates how they want to go about it, I think once they got the initial sticker shock of what it's going to cost to create an infrastructure to everybody that doesn't want to play ball with each other because they all want to have their own thing, and they're entitled to it. But, the sticker shock initially is what changes the closed-minded and turns it into open-minded, because I don't want to pay $200,000 or $300,000 out of the association fund to build an infrastructure that's going to be in 2-3 years from now not necessary. Whereas if we only have 3 people that want to plug in right now and potentially 5 in the next 2 years, if we just go ahead and do 6 in a communal space, make it app-based, make it so that the FPL gets charged on their credit card through the app or through the credit card, it goes back in the condo association fund. So they amortize both the install and the money that's being used by FPL. Everybody's happy. And we're just waiting to see what's going to come out next and what's needed as opposed to what we want.
Okay. And along those lines, with regards to sticker shock and pricing and whatnot, do you present to the boards all options? Like, in other words, because as you said, we don't know what's going to happen. We believe technology will continue to improve. But do you give like, hey, this is if you want to do just a few now. If you do want to spend the 300, this is how you should do it. How do you present that to the boards, and how should everyone on this call expect to get a presentation from a consultant and company like yours?
It's exactly that. The first thing I do is I give them a price on infrastructure. So if the building has 600 available amps, right? The one I did most recently was they had 600 available amps. We were going to put a 600 amp breaker panel in the electrical room that then fed 3 200 amp panels that were very strategically placed in the garage so that every unit owner would pay the same amount to get their charger to that 200 amp panel within their range. And so the building was going to pay for the infrastructure, and then the unit owner had to pay to get their charger put onto that panel, and they had to buy the charger. And the association basically said, here's a few different chargers you can choose from that we've already vetted out based on the conversation that I had with them doing their own homework on the brands. So infrastructure is always the first thing I go after. The second thing is I give them what each unit owner is going to pay potentially. And then third price I give them is if they just do communal spots. So they have the infrastructure with the individual unit owner, so they know what that's going to cost. And then they have the communal cost if they just do it in 6 guest spots, so that they can make a decision based on right now and what they think in a year from now on how to utilize their funds.
But Regan, remember, some people are gonna say, that's great to have a community station, but I don't want to jockey to juice up my car in a community station when I have the right to install an individual charging station. For some people, that's going to be a right that they consider an inalienable right. I do want to mention, it's interesting, the association can lien and foreclose if an owner is not paying for. It actually says the unit owner who's installing an electric vehicle charging station is responsible for the cost of installation, operation, maintenance, and repair, including but not limited to hazard and liability insurance. And if they don't pay for those things, the association has the right to lien and foreclose. That's a really significant right. The other thing I wanted to mention is it's not just about the installation of the individual station, but you may have to require that owner to remove it at some point if there needs to be maintenance or repairs made to the underlying pavement, okay, or structure. So that is why you need to get with council to create the necessary, in my opinion, a restrictive covenant is the best way to do it. But this is an agreement, because there's a lot more than just saying, okay, you can do it and they pay for it. You have to think about the long-term maintenance of this thing and the potential that it may get damaged in the storm, who pays to fix it, and that it may need to be voluntarily removed in the event that maintenance and repairs to the underlying common elements need to take place.
That is an important thing to keep in mind as we progress. Thank you, Donna. Danny, I want to transition into, and then a follow-up question for Donna, FP&L. We've spoken about infrastructure. We've spoken about some of the legalities. Everyone's question is, because everyone keeps hearing, if everyone got electric cars today, there wouldn't be enough power. If a building decides that they want to put 30 spots in, they might not get the energy that they want. Talk to us about FP&L, the best practice for management companies, whoever, to approach FP&L. Is that something the consultant does? Talk to us about that. FP&L obviously is a big piece of this entire process.
Yeah, so a lot of buildings don't have that much usable power left over after everything is said and done. And although every unit owner does have the right, when push comes to shove, if they don't have that much power and there's only a few unit owners that want, a level 1 charger is still giving them, a chance to plug in their own car, even though it takes, 300% or three times longer to charge. It still works, and most people don't drive more than 10 miles an hour. Now, when it comes to an FP&L consultation on bringing in more power, FP&L looks at two things. One, how much power are you actually going to use? If you tell me you're going to plug in 30 cars tomorrow, then we will give you the power. You'll have to do the engineering on your own. So we'll do the engineering with you. We'll do the design with you. We'll figure out where we're going to put all the new distribution. But FP&L needs engineered stamp sealed plans to be able to move forward. And those stamp sealed plans have to have load calculations based on what you're going to use today, not what you're going to use in the future. Because you might say, I want to plug in 60 cars in the future. FP&L can't give you that kind of power. Or they're going to tell you, okay, we'll give you enough power to plug in 60 cars, but seeing as you're not going to use it, you're going to have to pay to bring all that power in. And it's going to be a ludicrous amount of money, because every building, especially, the ones on the water, they want more power. They need to get more power, and FP&L doesn't have that kind of power. So they really want to see what you're going to use today. They'll give you what you're going to use today. And in a year from now, you need another 20 spots, and you have the proof that you have 20 cars that are going to plug in, then they'll give you more power again, and you're going to pay for it again. And you're going to have to do engineered drawings again, but they're not going to give you what you want as opposed to what you need.
Is it safe to say, Danny, then that FP&L might be also taking the approach of hoping or knowing that the technology is going to get better and doing it in phases this way? Would you say that's a fair statement, that they're kind of hoping on that as well?
I'd say that's a fair assumption.
Assumption. Okay. Donna, is that a good legal word? Assumption? Is that okay? I don't want to get in trouble.
I think that is a technical legal term. There you go.
Awesome. If I know, and I've done a lot of pilot programs with FP&L, I'm willing to bet FP&L is going to come out with a car charger that takes less power that they're going to sell you for $10 a month. You know what I mean? Every brand is stemming off another brand and stemming off another brand because it's a race. They're all in a race. 5 years ago, the big charger companies were, Siemens, Eaton, Square D, General or GE, and ChargePoint. And today, most of those don't exist because all the new brands that are coming out that are only concentrating on the advancement of EV chargers, that's all they're doing. They're doing very, very well. In Europe, you don't even have to plug a car in. You drive over the spot, just like how you put your phone down on those induction chargers. It's just like that. You don't even plug the car in. You just go over the spot and it starts charging. So yeah, we're going to see a lot of crazy things over the next probably 5 years, not even 10 years, because it's not just us in Florida now. It's North America, Europe, it's Asia, everywhere that has electric cars that are starting to be big. There is no electrical infrastructure to plug everybody in. It doesn't exist.
That's a fair point. Donna, how do you deal with, obviously if let's say FP&L is it's exorbitant to put 30 in, as Danny said, right? But there are more people than the 405. I imagine there might be conflicts between residents about using the few that are available. How would you, how from a legal standpoint, how would we deal with that?
Yeah, we have conflicts with owners right now over guest parking and because a lot of these older buildings were built with limited parking spaces. So we have parking issues already, let alone if you were to put in a car charging station. Again, I think to the point of surveying the owners, seeing, needs change over time. So to Danny's point, maybe you start out with 6 spaces as the demand grows over time, then you may have to upgrade and add on to that. Where I see there's going to be some real issues is who pays for the overall building upgrade for electrical. The statute is open for interpretation. To me, it says the unit owner pays for all costs related to the installation. So if that means the entire building's electrical infrastructure requires a $200,000 upgrade, are you going to really have an owner who's willing to pay $200,000 to upgrade the entire system? That owner is going to make the argument, well, wait a second, the association has to pay for that. That's not really supported by the language in the statute. The statute often also says that owners wishing to install these devices have to comply with all federal, state, and local laws. I'm sure, Danny, that there's ordinances about how much power you can put in a panel, correct?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, I think that is going to be the deterrent for some unit owners once they understand, yes, they have the legal right. Having a legal right to do something and a practical ability to do something are two entirely different things. So in some older buildings, I believe that owners who want to install in their individual spaces, once they figure out that it's going to be cost prohibitive, will probably support the installation of a community station.
Which is exactly what I shoot for when I do the initial meetings.
Yeah, in management, we're seeing from a technology standpoint, whether it's leak detection or whatnot, about infrastructure now, but also thinking 5 years down the road. Danny, can you speak a little bit about, personally, I found this really neat with the chargers that you're putting in, kind of how like they're Tesla and they're updating. Can you talk a little bit how they're automatically updating the technology as time goes on?
Yeah. So when I do the initial consultations, when I'm talking to people, number one, we don't represent any single brand. We don't care about the brand. I want you to do your research. I'll give you my recommendations for sure. And honestly, I learned about a company that I love right now through somebody that I was talking to on a site. I gave them my recommendations. And they're like, well, did you ever hear of this company? No. And they told me about it. I ended up talking to those people and they were great. And their product is great. It's because that person did their homework. The big things are software upgrades, remote software upgrades. So every charger brand is going to have a certain associated fees that come with it. Some have fees just to have their product. There's fees for networking. There's fees for the credit card chargers. They take a percentage of that. right? So you wanna look into that. You wanna look into if you have a rep that's gonna come and see you, or someone that you can call when you're having issues, because at the point of sale, you'll see reps, and at the point of once it's installed, you may not see them anymore. So you want to really do your homework and figure out what brand is best for your building, and I'll help you every step of the way. But a lot of times, a lot of the people I meet with they've been doing it for a month straight every single day. So most brands, especially reputable brands, will update their software remotely, so that as technology advances, they can actually dial it down remotely to say, okay, well, it used to take 40 amps, but we can take 30 amps and give you the same capacity of charge in the same time, because things just got better. The computer software that they installed is better now. They do power sharing. So a lot of buildings that I found where there was two people that only had one source of power, what they did was they shared the cost. They brought the one source of power to their spot. They put two chargers, and if only one person is charging, the charger charges at 100%. And if the person next to them takes the other charger and plugs in, then both of them only charge at 50%. And then when the other guy puts it back, it goes right back to 100%. So, I mean, this is also technology that is only probably about 2.5 years old, right? 4 years ago, didn't exist. It was 70, 80 amps. Then it was 60 amps. Then it was 40 amps. Now it's 30 amps. Now they came out with a new line. It's 48 amps, but it does two chargers at 48 amps, which essentially is like 24 amps, right? So they're continually getting better, and you don't have to change the product. You can just update the software.
Interesting. Well, that's an interesting look at what we have to come. It's obviously exciting. We look at our cell phones, TVs, everything, and what was 20 years ago compared to today. I imagine in 5 years it'll look different. And Donna brought up an amazing point in that all the new buildings are putting this in. The real estate market is hot, but the older buildings, when buyers are coming in, that's a question they're asking. And it's generally a new demographic, a younger demographic, more people that own EV cars. So it's definitely something from a management standpoint that we're talking to our clients about, at least, again, to Donna's point, exploring it. It doesn't cost anything, and then you have it if you want to come back to it later on. We have come to our time, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into Q&A. Now, we have been inundated with questions, which we expected just because of all the material here. We'll do our best, but we will get back to you after and perhaps do another webinar. Perhaps by then things have changed a little bit as well. So let's start with Dan Spivak. I realize the unit owner is responsible to pay for the installation of power to individual charger. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that there's enough power on the property for unit owners to pull from to install their individual charger? Also, is there an increase in insurance when installing a charger in an underground garage? The last part of this we did address. Danny spoke about the flood zone, underground garage, it being hit and miss with getting the permit or not. From an insurance standpoint, I'm not sure of the answer of that. We'll ask Donna and Danny as well. But let's start at the top of this. Donna, in your opinion, who's responsible to make sure that there's enough power for the unit owners to pull from?
So the starting point, typically, I will tell you, in my communities, the way we handle it is the person who's making the request has to substantiate the request. So he or she would have their engineer come out, tell them if there's sufficient power, and present a well thought out plan request to the board to install that charging station. If they have not submitted enough information, then we would go back and ask them to submit more information. But it's on the owner who's requesting this to provide that information. I will tell you also, Regan, that the statute clearly says that the owner is required to, the owner installing the device in a personal parking space is required to reimburse the association for any increase in the association's premium within 14 days of receiving the association's invoice for that increased premium. And remember the section I quoted before that says that if they don't pay, the association has the rights to lien and foreclose under 718.116. So it's something that owners who are thinking about installing these stations, they really need, they may even need their own counsel to help walk them through the process.
Okay, and Danny, have you, in the hundreds you've done, have you heard any of the clients say that there was an increase in insurance when you did get the permit to do it underground? Or excuse me, in the parking?
Yeah, no, I've never heard of that. You know, again, everything is UL listed and approved by the city. So there should be no reason for insurance to go up, but I don't know. Maybe depending on the insurance provider and what their stipulations are. You know, almost all of my calls come from either a board member that saw me, heard of me, saw us at a show, heard us, you know, at a presentation, that either they're already dealing with an owner that has an EV vehicle that needs to get a charger, or they themselves have an electric vehicle and they want to start looking into how to bring a charger in.
Okay,
Regan, one of my clients did reach out to the association's insurance agent, and they confirmed that the association's liability coverage would not cover the individual station.
oh, wow, so that, I mean, that's a material thing. I think maybe on the next one, we have an insurance expert. I'd love to dive into the costs of that and whatnot. Hopefully it's not too much. Okay, is Dan Spivak again, is there a way to get a meter directly from FP&L bypassing the condominium and by extension not affect the load on the condominium common elements? My understanding is no. Donna, Danny, I don't know if you.
I think that's a Danny question. I mean, in some
Danny?
communities, look, the statute says that they have to meter separately or they have to reimburse. But in terms of the physical, that's a Danny question.
Yeah, so I mean, technically, you could absolutely bring in so you'd have two FPL accounts. You like you own two houses. What's going to happen is when it hits the city paperwork, the city planner that's looking at it is going to say, okay, so you can do it for one of 200 people. Prove to me on paper that if every one of those people wanted to do it, that you can do it, that you have the room and you have the infrastructure, and that is where it's going to get thrown out.
Okay. All right, Paul Bunt, to stop individuals from having their own charging stations, how do you do it if you have common charging stations in place already? Donna?
Can't do it. That's what I was talking about. The law does not track the satellite dish law, which says if you install a community satellite dish, you can prohibit people from putting up their own dishes. We had actually suggested that modification to the bill sponsor, and it was rejected. So to answer Paul's question, there's no way you can stop it. You can erect guardrails, speak to your attorney. I mean, listen, you can stop it if the owner is just not able to comply with the statutory requirements. The charger is going to create irreparable damage to the building, or the owner's not willing to pay for the things they need to pay for, including additional insurance coverage.
Okay. Ren Luder, apologize if I mispronounced that. If the power to the building is not enough, does that allow the association not to allow a charging station?
That's another legal question. And if the owner says to you, I understand that there's not sufficient power, and we had this in one of our communities, a guy who said, I'll pay for the upgrade in the building's power. That's something that your association should speak with counsel. And again, that's a very complicated arrangement, and you'll need more than just a verbal or a written okay. You're going to need a really fleshed out agreement between that owner and the association.
Okay. We have a question here from Robert Lawrence. Donna, I don't think are you admitted in New Jersey?
We have two New Jersey offices, but no, I am not admitted in New Jersey.
Okay, so Robert, we'll get back to you with regards to New Jersey after this webinar. When you have shared charging stations and it takes 6, all right, how do you control it? Shared charging station and it takes 6 or 8 hours. Oh, okay. So Danny, the question relates, I guess, to if there's not enough power and they're sharing it. From an organizational standpoint, how do you line up when people are charging as far as order goes?
So I get that a lot, and that's truly nothing I or anybody else can do. That's up to the board and the unit owners to decide together what's the best course of action when you have somebody that's hogging a parking spot for 3 days and you tow their car. You know, who's going to pay for the tow? Was it okay to do that? You know, you can also deal with the charge company or the charge brand, that the next time that person goes to charge, instead of paying $1.50 or $2 per kilowatt hour, you can charge them $50 per kilowatt hour. And you can even put in writing that if you don't abide by these rules set by everybody, that these are going to be the consequences. But realistically, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, Regan, if your community is going to have electric vehicle stations, whether it's a community station or individual stations, that change in circumstance requires you to update and revisit your parking rules, okay? So you can't use out-of-date parking rules with a completely new technology. So if you're going in this direction, it really, really requires the board to go back, take a look at its parking rules and address the use of the charging station, you know, where you can't just park your vehicle there for days on end.
Yeah, and Donna, to your point, with the new, it might require an amendment to their documents, right?
Perhaps, yes.
That's something they should look at as well. Randy, thank you for that question. I see you asked if it was going to be sent out afterwards. Absolutely. We'll make sure that a recording is sent. Thank you for sharing that. Next question is from our very own Doug Weinstein, VP of Operations. Should there be any indemn documentation or other documentation a unit owner must execute when either installing their own charger or using one supplied by the association?
I have an indemnification provision in my restrictive covenant. Yes.
So you go with as you mentioned, the restrictive covenant is the best.
I do.
Okay. Okay. The next question. And everyone, certain questions which are very, very specific, I'm noting that I'm going to send to Donna afterwards that we can answer. We spoke about that. Do you have changes are responsible? Okay. A lot of these questions, I believe we have already answered. I just want to make sure that we don't miss any.
While you're looking, Danny, you know, the statute also addresses the installation of natural gas stations in these communities. Have you ever run across that? I don't know who's installing a natural gas station.
I've never seen it, ever.
Okay. I can't imagine why that needed to be in the law, but maybe in another part of the state, somebody's.
We do a lot of natural gas generators. And, you know, it turns into a lot of unit owners that want a generator somewhere to be able to power that panel. And it always gets thrown out every single time. By the time you get through the rules of the board and then the rules of the city, it's not impossible, but you could probably buy like 3 or 4 more places by the time you've paid for it.
It's one of those inclusions in the law where you just scratch your head and go, was this really a problem? Did we really need natural gas stations in condos?
Yeah. Never.
So we have another legal question here, Donna. What if unit owners put in the stations themselves before things got organized and they didn't do it with permits and whatnot? I'm guessing we're going to be talking about parking again, but how would you recommend dealing with that with those residents?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is why boards need to get out ahead of this. They should be talking to legal counsel right now and creating the framework for these requests. If you're telling me that somebody just went ahead and installed a station overnight, then speak to counsel about that as a potential violation of your documents. But, you know, you're going to have a problem if you don't have a framework and now you're trying to insert one after the fact. There is some baseline responsibility on the part of an owner that's installing something like an electric car charging station to prove that it was installed properly, that it was permitted and all the rest. But I think, you know, whoever wrote that question, if you've got somebody who went ahead and did this overnight, then you can always, sometimes with those kind of violations, you have your counsel reach out and you have them show that the proper steps were taken and discuss the responsibilities going forward. Danny would be able to tell you, how long does it take to install one of these things, Danny?
Essentially, a couple of days, permitting, a month to 2 months. But I've seen this because a lot of the buildings that I've gone to look at had, people had Teslas like 4 or 5 years ago. And 4 or 5 years ago, even the city wasn't accustomed to these kind of requests. So they didn't foresee what would happen in the future. And the city allowed the unit owners to tap off house power and put a charger in their spot. I have a few buildings with this. Here's the thing. You can't, like, I don't know, Donna, can they do something about it now? If they did it legally, permitted and tapped off house power and the board was fine with it when they did it, can they make a change now?
So it's a 5-year statute of limitations on breach of contract. And with the governing documents constituting the contract between the association and the owners. But certainly, look, if something's going in, you should immediately jump on it. Even if it's just a multi-day thing, you could have had council reach out and contact that owner immediately, contact the city and try to shut it down. I would say, speak to your attorney. When violations do occur, it doesn't mean if it's occurred, you're out of luck. It means that you're going to have to talk to council and figure out what steps you want to take to enforce after the fact.
Thank you, Donna. So with that, we've run out of time. What I'd like to do, I see a bunch of people asking about Donna and Danny's contact information. Please see it now on the screen. You can reach Donna at dberger@beckerlawyers.com, Danny D. Kadok at highpowerinc.com, and I'm available at rmaroc@acam.com. With that, I'd love for us to end on just a final summary statement. Danny, if you want to go first.
Awesome. Thank you. So first, figure out what you need right now. Get someone to come out, whether it's myself or your current electrical contractor, to figure out how much power you actually have available. Because a lot of times when it's just 4 or 6, it's a really simple installation. It's a real simple infrastructure upgrade. Like there isn't much to do, and it's not that expensive to do it. And at least for the next couple of years, everyone will be set.
Thank you, Danny. Donna?
I would say be proactive. Okay. Even if you don't think you're years away from anybody requesting an electric vehicle charging station, you may be wrong. And this is the area where you need these rules and framework in place before you need them, right? Not when you're scrambling, when you have a request on your table. So be proactive, speak to somebody like Danny, speak to your manager, speak to your attorney, speak to your engineer. But this is coming, folks. People want these vehicles more and more. And also it does assist with resale value in your community.
Thank you, Donna. I obviously echo everything that both of you have said. What I wanted to say was, technology, while a little bit different, the organizational infrastructure of what's being used today is somewhat similar. So to have a session with someone like Danny and understand the process is going to help you in other areas of the building and kind of stay along with how technology is evolving. So take the time, it doesn't cost you anything. And then just let me re-emphasize what Donna said. This is a major project. So don't try save a few pennies by not speaking to your lawyer and trying to do it yourself, because I can assure you, you're going to end up paying a lot more because it's novel. We're still figuring it out. So allow us to figure it out with you. We're working with the experts. Donna's keeping in contact with what's happening in Tallahassee. And as a team, we can get this done for you. So I want to thank Donna, who I've known for many years. I have the utmost respect on every level. Danny, it's a little bit new of a relationship, but we also have the utmost respect for you, and we look forward to you providing a presentation to our managers tomorrow. So with that,
Thank you, Regan. This was fantastic.
Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate everything.
bye, guys.